Hello, I'm your host, Brian Callanan. Seattle's transportation levy, the largest levy in city history, is now headed to the ballot. If voters approve it, what impact could it have on safety, traffic congestion, and carbon emissions? Plus, there's a new report on drug overdoses and crime in Seattle that the City Council says could lead to some new solutions. Can Seattle clean up some of its most notorious neighborhoods? Council President Sara Nelson and Councilmember Saka join me to answer these questions and the ones you're sending in too, next on Council Edition.
We try to be very thoughtful in putting this package together to make sure that we address the concerns of our most vulnerable taxpayers.
This is what keeps me up at night, seeing the impacts of our drug crisis on the community.
All that and more coming up next on City Inside Out, Council Edition. And here we are with Council President Sara Nelson. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you for having me again.
And we also have with us Councilmember Saka from District 1. Councilmember Saka, good to see you too.
Hey, good morning, Brian. Happy to be here.
All right, let's do this thing. Councilmember Saka, I'll start with you here. You chaired the Transportation Committee and helped shepherd through the new transportation levy that voters will be considering this fall. It's a $1.55 billion levy. It's the largest in city history, which works out to be an increase of about $18.58 more per month for a median homeowner in Seattle. So as a way to get the discussion started, if I could here, I'll throw in a message from a viewer who writes this. Why did the council approve the new levy size? Should have cut scope and treat taxpayer dollars with the respect they treat their own. I wanted to put that out there because I know there's a lot of discussion about the size of this levy. Some council members were pushing for an even bigger levy, but if you could talk about that, respond to some of those concerns about the cost and the size of this levy.
Yeah, great question, Brian. I appreciate the question from the constituent as well. So first off, let me make clear, voters are now going to be able to decide. That said, I'll talk about how we crafted this package. It was a very deliberative, collaborative process. The final proposal, what it is right now is a proposal. Again, voters are going to decide. The final proposal was a direct result of a lot of collaboration between me and my council member colleagues, community groups. There's a lot of people involved and individuals who took the time to show up and testify and send emails and call and stop me at the grocery store and say, hey, so I understand the concerns about affordability. And there was proposals on the table for $1.7 billion. Earlier proposals for $2 billion levy and $3 billion levy. And it turns out the $1.55 billion levy was the compromised approach. I'm mindful of those concerns. I think we crafted the best package. And not only is it one of the most transformative levies in Seattle history, but it also, and I'm proud of this, it's the most accountable. It has the strongest set of accountability mechanisms and oversight provisions and controls baked in to make sure that whatever dollar amount we're investing, whether it's $1 or $1.55 billion, we're making sure it's responsibly invested.
And I know too, there were some amendments.
And again, can I say?
Please.
Voters are going to have the final say.
Voters will decide. And voters need to be aware too, there are a number of different mechanisms put into this package that actually, if people want to reach out and get some of the help that they might need with utility bills, that's included in this levy too. I wanted to make sure I pointed that out. It's an important piece of this.
Yeah. And we try to be very thoughtful in putting this package together to make sure that we address the concerns of our most vulnerable taxpayers. So that's why taxpayers who qualify for existing state and county tax or property tax exemption and relief programs, there's a cool initiative in there to educate people about those and better connect them with existing services. And so we took this process very seriously, all of us, every last one of us. So, but I'm proud of where we landed. And again, voters are going to have the final say.
I got you. And I know we have to be very careful about this. I don't want to make sure we're not leaning voters anyway here. But Council President Nelson, any thoughts about this levy?
I will say, I have a bit of a historical perspective because I was staffing Councilmember Richard Conlon when the Bridging the Gap.
When it was first called Bridging the Gap,
the first levy. And that was in a different context of governance. It was when every single council member represented the whole city.
That's right.
And so when I think a different dynamic this time around is district elections, and the fact that 7 of the 9 council members are responsive to the constituents in their districts. And so each council member is naturally, and rightly so, advocating for projects that will benefit their part of the city. And so I think that when we talk about the size of the levy, that does come into play as well.
That's a very good observation. Thanks for bringing that one up. And Councilmember Saka, I did want to ask a follow-up question from a viewer about what this levy would achieve if voters approve it. Carl writes this: Seattle has a target of 90% of all personal trips being zero emissions by 2030. Will this levy get us across the zero emissions finish line by 2030? If not, what next steps does the Transportation Committee need to take to make sure we stay on track? He's raising some concerns that this is an 8-year levy, which takes us into the year 2033. Are we going to meet that 2030 measure? I think that's the big question.
Yeah, so it's a great question. I'm proud of so first off, again, voters are going to get the final say on this. Historically, Seattle voters have approved levies for the past 18, transportation levies for the past 18 years, dating back to the 2006 Bridging the Gap. This levy that is expiring, this is a renewal levy, not a net new levy. This is a renewal levy, for clarity. It constitutes approximately 30% of SDOT's budget. And so with respect to our ability, look, there are a lot of strong sustainability and environmental provisions and programs and projects baked in here. One of those is access to transit. We have a lot of safe routes to schools initiatives. We have a cool new EV charging infrastructure. Like for cars, there's parallel efforts underway, as you know, to electrify our transit fleet.
Right.
Because we don't exist in a vacuum. We're silos. We all work together. So I think this package, again, it's a proposal. Voters are going to decide.
That's right.
It puts us in the best possible position to achieve and live up to our climate goals.
Okay, and we will see what voters do with it. Thank you for that.
I want to say one thing about that. I want to get away from this pitting of pedestrians and bicyclists versus cars and trucks, et cetera. We're all using the same transportation infrastructure. And what we need to do is preserve our infrastructure, maintain our infrastructure, improve our schedule of maintenance so that we don't have to pay for more expensive potholes down the way. And so we're not talking about bicycles versus cars, pedestrians versus bicycles, buses versus trucks, et cetera. This is our common infrastructure, bridges, roads. That's what all of these modes go on, and that's what's very important for people to recognize, that we're all in this together, all modes together.
Okay.
100%. Okay. I'll just pile on and say that there's so many interdependencies between one mode and another. We can't just slice one off and say, we're only going to prioritize bikes. Yeah. Bikes travel on roads, which so do cargo trucks, freight mobility. Yes, right. So do cars. So we can't just prioritize one set of investments. It's all tightly interwoven and interconnected. It's one transportation system. Yeah. So there was a lot of thought. So I feel good about the fact that this levy, if passed, it would make significant progress in advancing whatever our personal choice is, transportation choice, whether we choose to walk, bike, take transit, drive, whatever it is.
Okay. So we will see what voters do.
Voters are going to get the final say.
That's right. That's right. Council President Nelson, let me head back to you. The governance committee that you chair recently discussed a new report from the City Auditor that was commissioned by former Council President Deborah Juarez and Mayor Harrell. It has 57 pages of research about where drug overdoses and crime are concentrated in Seattle. These are areas that are well known to city leadership and probably many city residents, too. The report had a case study of 3rd Avenue, and the auditor says there are 10 continuous street segments in Seattle, small geographic areas, where there are 100-plus crimes against people and overdose incidents combined, so really concentrated in a disproportionate way. And I wanted to talk about this because you put out a press release, you've talked about this in committee, you're very eager to act on this information, but I want to try to put this in historical context because I think back to 2015. Then Mayor Murray had this 9.5-block strategy, talked about something very similar, working with law enforcement, outreach workers to clean up 3rd Avenue. Just 2 years ago, Mayor Harrell started something called Operation New Day, police and social workers, again, concentrating on this area around 3rd Avenue. I just want to ask, what is going to be different this time?
Well, That's what I want to know too. And that's why I put so much attention on this audit. You know, I identify with the commenters that spoke before the meeting and the people that write me emails daily, et cetera, saying, when are we gonna see some change? I'm tired of a new plan, et cetera. And I agree with that, and perhaps no one is as impatient as I am as the Economic Development Chair. This is what keeps me up at night, seeing the impacts of our drug crisis on the community. And so my goal of putting such a focus on this audit was to make people realize that we already have the resources. This audit identified existing federal resources, technical support, funding support. It also looked at other jurisdictions where they are being more effective in dealing with the combined crises of drug addiction and crime. And so what I wanted to do was to get away from this idea that we don't have the resources to deal with these problems. And I fall into that trap too. I've been saying we don't have enough, until SPD is fully staffed,
Sure.
We're not going to make significant progress. What this audit made me realize is that we can more effectively deploy our existing resources in a more targeted fashion to make difference in very troubled locations.
Okay.
And so what this audit did was it talked about what are those conditions that are generating the problems in those places. And it was very honest about the fact that what the case study that this audit focused on was based on a two-block segment of 3rd Avenue where there is Plymouth Permanent Supportive Housing. There's
Virginia to Blanchard, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right. YWCA, there's also an Evergreen Treatment Services. Yeah. And so that is a place where very vulnerable people congregate that are dealing with addiction. And so everybody... that's okay to recognize. And so how do we address the services that those people need? The audit focused on the fact that inside permanent supportive housing and on the street outside, we've got people using and selling drugs. And so we need more recovery-based services inside. We need to have more targeted law enforcement response outside. And so again, getting away from this the scarcity mindset, we can't solve these problems because we don't have the resources. I would love to have more treatment centers and more officers.
Sure.
But given that, let's make sure we are deploying our existing resources effectively, more effectively, as other neighboring jurisdictions such as Snohomish County are. And let's get the help that's already out there and offered to us. And so that is what I wanted to bring to light. And the top three, or the first three recommendations in the audit are the mayor's office should lead on this effort, assign someone who will take the lead and be accountable for results,
right,
and work with these external agencies. We do not have to recreate the wheel. We don't need a brand new plan. We just need to do what we know we have to do to make a difference.
Thank you. And I know, Councilmember Saka, you're on the governance committee too, and you're digesting this audit here. Some thoughts about it, where you want this process to go?
Yeah, so it's a great report. I want to thank the council president for hearing it in her committee. I want to thank past Council President Juarez and Mayor Harrell for their leadership in commissioning this important audit. It's very eye-opening from my perspective. There's a lot of important takeaways that we need to urgently act upon. But I think, I mentioned this yesterday during the committee, but the public is tired of, we're not going to report our way out of this. We're not going to document our way out of this. We need to do a better job of bringing to life the concrete, tangible results and actions that are going to flow from this. But this is a necessary precondition. This report is a necessary precondition for allowing us to do that. One important takeaway, Brian, that I think, from my perspective, one of the punchlines, if you will, from this, out of the 8 audit recommendations in the 65-plus page report, multiple appendices, is that the city as a whole, we have an opportunity to better collaborate outside of the city. We're doing a great job and get better every day collaborating with each other, with across departments. But we need to do a better job of leveraging existing federal resources,
sure,
state, county resources, and understanding best practices to go after these challenges head on. And by the way, treat them not only as a public health lens, but yes, there's an important public safety aspect that our law enforcement professionals need to be involved with as well.
Yeah.
So, but I'm encouraged, but I share the urgency because we're not going to document our way out of this.
Right.
We're also,
please, yeah.
Well, and building off what you just said, the mayor has said he has the council that he wants right now.
Right.
And the legislative branch has its duties and the executive has its duties. And we can convene because we have committee meetings. We can convene conversations. We pass laws. We pass budgets. We do not control the police or the unified care team,
right,
et cetera. And so part of the we need to work together and each branch do our jobs in coordination to make a difference for the people of the city.
Thank you. And I just wanted to ask a follow-up question from one of our viewers about resources. When I think about this, that's a big question. I know it is for you, too. Joseph wrote this. Are we going to increase funding for outreach and substance use disorder services, such as LEAD? Why doesn't the council encourage the development of a new therapeutic court after we lost community court? I know there's a bit to unpack there, but I wanted to put that out there, a response for Joseph in talking about resources and what the city is going to do with its resources.
I think we should only allocate resources to services that work, frankly. And
is LEAD working?
I believe that LEAD is an incredibly important organization. It's a model that can work very well. I need to understand more what is happening to the people that are being stopped for public drug use, because we now have a public drug use ordinance.
Right.
And they are rightly diverted into law enforcement diversion programs so they don't go to jail. We're not trying to get people into jail. We're trying to get them into preferably recovery-based substance use. Yeah. Addiction services, rehab, so that they can get their lives back together. And I need to follow up and find out what is happening with the people that are stopped for public drug use, diverted into the LEAD program, and then what happens? Because LEAD is not the end; it's a means.
Right.
And so I need to go through some data and some reporting and talk to Lisa Dugard, who's the head of that agency, and really find out how is it going.
Yeah.
And how can we improve things?
Okay.
I will always say that fentanyl is a new drug. It's deadly, ubiquitous, and cheap.
Yeah.
And it blows our old strategies out of the water when it comes to the urgency that we need to get people into services that they can put their lives back together. And also remember, right now our harm reduction strategies, people focus on medication for opioid use disorder.
Right.
That does nothing for methamphetamine. Methamphetamine is stronger. It's on the streets now. And so that is why I'm always focused on actual rehab where people can either go and spend some time away from all the pressures in their daily lives, detox, and get that counseling support, or intensive outpatient services. And those are proven strategies. Also, the report did document the success of the contingency management program that Plymouth Housing piloted.
Right.
That is a program that rewarded people who...
Gift cards, right, yeah.
Yeah, everybody called it the gift card thing. But, and that made it sound trite, but what it does is it rewards people for trying to abstain from use for a certain amount of time, get a clean urine analysis, and then get their minds in a different place so that they can make different choices going forward, maybe go into inpatient or outpatient treatment if they want to.
Okay, thank you for that. I would like to move on if I could, because there's a very important story about gun violence I want to talk to you about. Councilmember Saka, you had some recent efforts with this. There was a fatal shooting of a 22-year-old man in the Alki neighborhood a couple of weeks ago. You held a public meeting to talk about this with a number of neighbors at the Alki UCC. A number of those neighbors have been pushing for more action against crimes like this and street disorder too. Interim Chief Sara was there along with a number of other city leaders. And there are a lot of frustrated people, as you know, in District 1 in that neighborhood. What message are you trying to put out to them? What sort of action are you working on to respond to this?
Yeah, so that would happen. And just to level set on what happened, a 22-year-old man was tragically gunned down at Duwamish Head in Alki at 4 in the morning. And in an area that is known to experience problem racing, problem drinking, partying, and like gathering tomfoolery, to be honest, Brian, at all hours of the day and night. And unfortunately, in connection with that, 2 nearby residents who live across the street, their homes were shot up like a war zone.
Yeah.
And so I was proud to act quickly. I was the very next morning, within hours, I was down on scene, visiting the scene, talking to frontline first responders, police, fire. Within 4 days, 5 days, however long it was, we organized and got all the people in the room from the city government perspective that were, make no mistake, community holds a strong role as well. Sure. We're not they're in any event.
Yeah.
I was proud to get at least 5 critical groups in the same room that are directly accountable to those residents for what happened. Me, our colleague Councilmember Tanya Wu, who represents citywide, representatives from mayor's office, leaders from parks, SDOT, and the chief of police, and we developed a concrete action plan. Every last one of the executive departments responsible for implementing, these safety measures and countermeasures took important action items and next steps away from that. So we're going to be working hard to make sure and holding people accountable, myself included. Yeah. By the way, I'm fed up with it too. So.
Gathering that group is the start of this. And maybe, Councilor, please.
Well, and also, we, out of the Public Safety Committee, passed this piece of legislation on street racing.
I was going to bring that up in a minute.
Right.
Let's go,
Well, I'm just going to say that it's going to come before full council, I believe, next week, and that was, I believe, it was generated by the city attorney's office, and then in collaboration with Public Safety Chair Kettle.
Yes.
And that's the sort of fast turnaround of legislation that we need to see to deal with these things. And I would like to know more about, the other day in committee, you mentioned the tragic shooting that began your tenure on council, and what you think about that, and changes that need to be made there. I'd be interested in knowing what you
a 15-year-old that was at the Southwest Community Center. Did you want to touch on that?
15-year-old Mubarak Adam, to be exact. And I had the pleasure of speaking with his brother just yesterday, I think, and I'm trying to coordinate another meeting with the family because there are some important actions and next steps on multiple levels of government, particularly with respect to potential state law changes that we might need to make. But in any event, the chief of police mentioned it at the LCI meeting that I helped organize and convene. The same challenges that impacted and frustrated the ability of law enforcement to effectively just gather facts.
Right, talk with witnesses, yes.
Non-criminal witnesses.
Right.
Non-criminal, that's an important element now. And the same thing that prevented facts from being daylighted in the Mubarak Adam case were the same facts that tragically so far appear to be thwarting the investigation of the Garfield student who was killed and gunned down. Black and brown people are dying in this city, and we need to do better. Well,
Please.
I mean, sometimes well-intentioned laws end up having negative impacts.
These were laws intended to protect younger people from talking to the police if they didn't have legal ground to stand on, et cetera. Keep going.
Yeah, and you've been educating me about this, and I really appreciate your comments in committee. And we will have a chance to help OIR formulate a legislative agenda going into next session. So I will appreciate your leadership there.
I'm looking forward to that.
We'll see what's happening there. Another public safety issue. I wondered if I could talk to you, Council President Nelson, about police hiring, and I'm going to come at it a different way because we've got a very interesting question about this from a viewer. So the city recently announced that CARE, the third public safety agency for the city of Seattle, is expanding. It's going to have its 911 alternative response program citywide. So these are behavioral health specialists going out to these low-intensity calls instead of police officers. Our viewer wanted to know this. If we can't fill every SPD officer position funded in the budget, will the council consider funding CARE responders instead, who the city would have an easier time recruiting? So these CARE responders don't have to go through a police academy. They could get hired more quickly. Seems like they're having a good impact. They don't cost as much. What do you think?
I think that that there is no one who doesn't like the idea of officers not responding to certain situations where clearly a social worker or a behavioral health specialist should be there instead. The question is, how do you figure out which are those calls? And so I will say that I would say that I am Chief Smith's #1 fan, but I have too much competition to be able to make that claim. But
Sure.
I'll say that she is exactly the voice that we need because she brings an analytical mind to this issue, and the pilot care program has been in effect since October,
Right.
and it's due to sunset at the end of next year. And so when we're talking about the expansion of the program citywide, there are labor. There is a nexus with bargaining with the police department.
Right.
It has to take place to enable that to happen. And so therefore, because I'm on that committee, I can't really talk more about that.
Okay,
but
okay.
every great idea is more complicated to implement than one would like.
Okay.
And so that's all I'll say.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's fair. Could you tell me real quick, I just wanted to touch on this with a 1-minute version if I could. You were working on this app-based delivery driver legislation. I know there was a lot of urgency around it because these pay-up laws went into effect at the start of this year. A number of restaurants said, whoa, this is no good. The apps put on these $5 fees because of these laws, et cetera, and we're not getting as many orders. I know there was a lot of urgency around this. I'm just trying to figure out where this is right now. Can you update us?
Well, that passed out of my committee on a vote of 4 in favor and 1 abstention.
Right.
And that council member who abstained requested more time to do the outreach, broader outreach. There had already been months of outreach between the drivers and the network companies because those are the two stakeholder groups that are directly impacted by the legislation.
Okay.
She wanted to broaden that conversation, speak with the advocates that pushed the previous council into passing that legislation, and I need to check with her on the status of response to my package of amendments that is on the table, which is increasing the required payment to workers of Seattle's minimum wage of $19.97.
Right.
I got a agreement amongst the network companies to increase that to 110% of minimum wage. So bringing that dollar amount, I believe, don't check my math, but I think that it is $27.
It's around that, yes.
Okay, yeah, $27. So $27 is on the table right now, and I need to tie things up with my colleagues before deciding when it will be brought to full council, because I want to make sure that those efforts have concluded before doing so.
Okay.
And we have been, it's clear that this is urgent because drivers' income has dropped drastically, as have the revenue of small businesses that depend on these services.
Yeah.
I'm going more than 1 minute.
That's, yeah, you sure are. Yeah. Yeah.
But basically, it is urgent.
Yeah.
The urgency has not gone away. However, I, as president, need to allow for the process to take its place before ramming something through to a final vote.
Fair. Councilmember Saka, the president has spoken, and unfortunately, we are out of time here. But
I woun't have anything else to add either. So I was pretty dozed down with the levy, and my record on that is pretty clear. So I need to get up to speed.
All right.
Well said.
We've got a busy summer ahead. Thank you both for joining us, and we will see you next time on Council Edition.
Awesome.